Tell me about your background. Did you grow up in New York? I know you went to school in New York.
No, I grew up in New York, in Spring Valley, New York, which is just above New York City, and sort of went to.
It's like suburbia?
Yeah, just your basic suburbia. It was a.
You may get on the train every morning, go into Manhattan, that kind of.
Well, my parents would have, my family would have, or the people in the neighborhood would have. But when I was a kid, we were 20 miles from New York. We used to go in every now and then, see the Yankee game or something like that. Used to walk across the George Washington Bridge. You would never do that now and survive it. But and then I went to college at New York State University and went on from there.
Which New York State?
Oneonta. Only New York State people would know that school. But it's a teacher's college in the top of a mountain in Oneonta, New York.
Did you choose it because you wanted to be a teacher because it was on top of the mountain?
No, neither. I definitely didn't want to be a teacher. But when I went to high school, when I was about to graduate, my dad had a series of operations. He went blind. I mean, he was an accountant, like a sole proprietor, and so I stayed.
So he was home. He was a self-employed CPA?
Yeah. So I stayed home with him to help him run his business while he went through that. And so I had to go to school somewhere near home. And so that's what I did.
So you'd come home from school every day?
No, I went originally, my first 2 years, I went to community college right around the corner, and then I went off to Oneonta, which was only 2.5 hours away, so I could come back and forth if I had to. And it turned out to be a great experience. And it was one of the things I got a lot of good feeling about myself from doing it from my father.
Well, this must have been tough in high school. I mean, to get thrown this curve. I mean, high school is kind of that time you're completely selfish and you're full of yourself and you're doing all this stuff, and all of a sudden, you're home taking care of your dad. I mean, that must have really been difficult.
My dad was probably the most important person in my life, and
was your mom a housewife?
Yeah, my mom was a housewife, but she worked in the office with him, and so they were kind of a working unit.
So it was like dad's office was a few blocks away. You get up and walk to work in the morning.
Well, no, it was maybe a mile away, but which was a long way away in my little town. But it was a sort of a close-knit family, and it was just kind of the right thing to do, and there was no question about it.
Did all this going on get in the way of you, being in sports, and were you able to have a normal high school life, all this going on?
I had a normal high school life, but I don't think anyone ever accused me of being an athlete. So, I played basketball with my friends.
Well, not if the rule of playing
that
golf
kind of stuff.
Is speed, not score.
Yeah, well, I wasn't tremendously athletic, and I'm not tremendously tall or fast or anything. So sports wasn't really an issue. But I had a great time in high school. I did reasonably well in school, and did okay in college, and I felt pretty good about myself when I graduated.
Were you entrepreneurial? Like a paper route, or did you run a business?
My father always taught me when I was a kid to work hard, always keep going, never give up. You can accomplish anything, and these are kind of some of the things that have stuck with me. So when I was a kid, when I was 11, 12 years old, I delivered every newspaper in the neighborhood. We had like 2 or 3 neighborhoods next to each other. There were maybe 150 houses, which normally would have been 3 paper routes, but I somehow angled it, so I got them all, and then I mowed everybody's lawn. So I was working kind of full time. I worked at my dad's office.
What time did you get up in the morning?
I woke up 8 o'clock. I don't sleep a lot. I never have. I sleep maybe 4 or 5 hours a day at most.
So your edge has always been you have more energy than anybody else.
I always felt like you live longer because you're up longer. During the day, if you stay up 20 hours a day, you actually have more time to live. Of course, my doctor said it's not actually like that. It's more like a car. The mileage counts too. So you have a certain amount of hours to be alive.
And I think the tachometer matters too. Like when you run at red line all the time.
Yeah, and it doesn't. I drink 15 to 20 cups of coffee a day. So
you do now, or you did then?
I do now, and I always have. I'm naturally hyperactive, and I.
So like in high school, you were like popping coffees between class?
Yeah, I'm naturally hyperactive, and I actually accentuate that by drinking more coffee somehow.
Wow. Okay, so you get into computer sales. Who'd you work for?
I first worked for a little tiny company called UNICOM, and this was the first they called it a computer company. We sold electronic calculators, was really the first ones, and sort of what we called mini computers. And these things were pretty large then. I mean, they weighed like 35 pounds, and in order to be in this business, you had to be pretty strong so you could carry these things in and out to show people. And I was there for about 4 months, and then they developed this thing called the Bomar Brain, which was the first real tiny electronic calculator.
Set off the calculator revolution.
Yeah, and my calculators that I was selling cost $2,500, and I saw this thing, and this thing was like this big and weighed, a couple ounces, cost $100, and I said, I don't think I'm going to win against this.
I think I have a big future with this company.
This company's going to die. So I left, and then.
Were you a good salesman those days? Were you a natural salesman?
I thought I was pretty good. I'm not necessarily a naturally talented salesman in the traditional sense, schmoozing and stuff like that. But I always figured out a way to win. And
what was the way? How did you leverage your personality?
I worked harder than anybody else, and found a way to get in, did research on the accounts.
So you knew more about the clients.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that was part of it. And I always felt like I could win if I could just work harder than anybody else, which which I did. And then I went to a company called Computer Design, which had really state-of-the-art products. These were like Hewlett-Packard programmable calculators years before they were famous. And they had, geometric functions and trigonometric functions. And I would take these into laboratories like Bell Labs and Union Carbide Labs, and the scientists would grab it right out of the box and want to buy it. And I came home and told my wife, this is the easiest job in the world. I mean, these things cost $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, the easiest thing in the world to make. Well, it was a little tiny company run by a sort of genius but crazy guy who had never had any experience in business. Turned out we were selling...
No shortage of those, yeah.
No, not out here. We were selling these things for about 1/4 what they really cost to make. So there was a reason why they were very attractive.
No wonder they're flying off the
right,
shelves.
So that company went
So you're going to
bankrupt.
make it up in volume?
Yeah, so that company went bankrupt. And I wound up with a company called GE Information Services.
Wait, so you're married in all this?
Yeah.
Did you get married in college, or?
I got married to my high school sweetheart, and I got divorced, within a few years of that. It was kind of a happy ending for both parties. But anyway, I joined a company called GE Information Services, and we sold computer time sharing, and I stayed there for 14 years.
GE might be around for a little while?
Yeah, GE will probably survive another 110 years or whatever, and that's what I did.
Now, this is a big step. I know a number of people who have been vice presidents, division general managers, group vice presidents. In the back of their minds, there's always this thing: I want to cross the river to the land of CEOs. That this is the big step, no matter.
Right.
It may be a little tiny company, but I want that CEO title. Was that always in the back of your mind? You wanted that gig?
Yeah, I don't think I thought of it in terms of the title. I wanted to be in charge. I wanted to go out and make the mistakes, do it my way, and make it work. And I knew I would die trying to make it work. So that's what I really wanted. I didn't care really what the title was.
Were you married again at this point?
Yeah, I've been married now for since 1980.
Were your folks still alive?
Yes, they still are.
What did they think? You've got this huge, powerful job. You got 1,000 people working for you. You're making a ton of money in this distinguished corporation.
Yeah.
Hi, Mom and Dad. Hello, dear. I'm going to quit my great job and go work for a dying company on the brink of disaster, and I'm going to be the boss and take all the blame.
Well, of course, by that time I was 37 years old, so I didn't regularly ask permission from my mom and dad.
No, but it's not a matter of permission.
They thought I was nuts. They thought I was absolutely nuts.
Yeah, you don't need permission, but
Right.
their opinions do matter.
My wife's been tremendously supportive of whatever I've done, and she's been my partner all along. And that's partly because she really understood. She had her own software company in the early 80s, and so she really understood the
She's an
industry.
entrepreneur, too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I joined this little company that it sort of exceeded my expectations. We turned it around, we built it to $100 million, and I sold it 3 years later to Computer Sciences. And
Was it always your intention to sell it off?
Yeah. Well, that was what the owner wanted to do.
So
He wanted
you
me to
literally
sell it.
were a turnaround specialist.
Yes, and by the way, I did the same thing at GE. When I became general manager there, the company had been sort of floundering. We had negative revenues for 3 years in a row, and we turned it around and started growing again.
Well, that's a different mindset, though, isn't it? Being a turnaround guy as opposed to being a builder?
Well, it depends. It depends on how you do it. If you come in and slash jobs and all that, that's a lot of people think of that as a turnaround artist.
Chainsaw it?
Yeah, I don't think of that as a turnaround artist. To me, a turnaround artist is taking a business that's kind of dying, and now you rebuild it. You build it into a big business. The businesses I joined, turned into growth companies.
Did you like doing that best?
Yeah, I love doing that. I love doing that. We had a company, was a little company when I took it over, and really didn't feel good about itself. And when I left, it was growing like crazy. When I got there, we had no international operations. About half our revenue was international when I left. We had big growing operations around the world. And
is that the part of the company's growth you like?
Yeah.
I mean, different people have different phases they like. Some people like 3 people on cardboard boxes, and some people like newly public companies, and some people like standing like the Colossus over this giant corporation.
Well, standing like the Colossus probably isn't my number one thing. I mean, it certainly is not. But I think that the real kick is taking something small, whether you start it from scratch or whether you turn it around, or you have 50 people or 75 people, and then you turn it into a bigger company that's growing and on a really positive track. To me, that's the kick. That's what you get the energy from. And so I actually stayed at CSC for a couple of years as the CEO, just to make sure it worked well into their culture. And then I took over UUNET in early '94.
Did you stay at the previous company out of duty to the people that were working for you to make sure they transitioned?
There
you didn't have to do that. They would have given
No.
you a golden parachute. You could have exited real fast.
There were 2 things. One, there was a responsibility to the people. I wanted to make sure that it worked well. And 2, a responsibility to the company I sold it to. I felt sort of loyal. We told them it was a good company, it was going to work well, and I wanted to make sure it integrated well. And it did.
I mean, that's not a common business practice these days.
Not as much these days.
Especially in your world, in the internet world.
Yeah, although I bet I'm not the only one that's done that. But anyway, there's a certain guilt factor you get if you grow up in New York or anywhere around New York. That's somehow part of the program. But
what was the state of UUNET when you took it over?
UUNET was first of all, you have to remember, this was really before most people had ever heard of the internet. It's only 5 years ago, but
right.
then nobody knew what the internet was. Today, everybody thinks they're an expert. But nobody really knew what it was. It was this mystical thing. It was controlled by heavyweight technical guys and who spoke their own language and had their own, special decoder rings. If you didn't have one, you couldn't talk to them. And it was a very different environment.
Okay, so
UUNET was,
you enter in this company in this sort of nascent industry,
Yeah.
kind of an insider game, and then all of a sudden, Mosaic/Netscape comes along, and it takes off.
Yeah.
Did you know this was coming? Did you have any clue that you were about to jump on a rocket?
Not really. When I joined, it was before Netscape. But I got a call from the venture capitalist originally who put money in. He was a guy that I worked with years ago at GE, and I went and talked to him, and I said, this company's called UUNET, and I looked at it and I said, this is ridiculous. This little teeny tiny company. I'm already running a $100 million business. And then I went and I interviewed with Rick, and I spent hours and hours with Rick, and I really was impressed. And I met the technical people, and these were the traditional beard and sandals, brilliant engineer kinds of guys, lots of beards and stuff like that. And I just fell in love with the place. It was just very exciting and stimulating. And I told people, I said, this thing could blow up completely in a couple of months and never work, and I'll be back doing something else again. Or it could be spectacularly successful, but it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun.
I'm always curious, CEOs of companies that grow as fast as you do and have such a dominant position in your market category, the CEOs sometimes can anticipate the growth, or at least a fraction of it, and they can manage that. The one thing that always blindsides them is the sudden appearance of the United States government in the equation. That you can sit down with your business plan, your spreadsheets, and you can look at the numbers, and you can look at your competitors, and you get a pretty good lay of the landscape, and then this weird thing suddenly appears over the horizon like an ICBM, and it's the Justice Department, or it's the SEC, or it's, in your case, it was the European Union, saying these people are a monopoly, they have too much power, we have to, you're in the middle of a merger. We have to break up that merger because it'll give UUNET too much power.
It was kind of odd because, first of all, I sold UUNET to a company called MFS in early '96 because we wanted access to the telecommunications facilities. And then I became president of MFS, and 4 months later I sold the whole thing to WorldCom and became vice chairman of WorldCom. And, our strategy at the time, and, Bernie Ebbers and I shared this, was, to continue to treat this whole thing as a development project, and, because deregulation and the internet had really changed the industry, and if we kept moving, we thought we could change the landscape. So we went out and acquired as aggressively as we could, and we deployed capital. And through that whole thing, and we wound up buying MCI, which nobody in the world believed was possible. It was a company 3 times our size, and we found a way to pull that off. And we never really anticipated the strength at which the government would come at us for UUNET, because here we had this big MCI piece, and WorldCom, and all these huge players, and suddenly the world was like frightened to death of little old UUNET. It wasn't so little then, but it just, it always, to me, it was always a little terrific company, and suddenly it had become very
And this isn't a business problem anymore. Now you have all sorts of other factors. It's a political problem. It's a public relations problem.
Yeah, although we did get through it at the end. See, the real trick was there was some question about whether selling off MCI's internet assets would be acceptable, and they really wanted us to sell off UUNET, and we made it clear up front we would not have merged with MCI if we had to sell UUNET. As ridiculous as that sounded, we thought UUNET was really the rocket, and it turns out to be, the way it happened.
So you're buying MCI. Now, you've dealt with some pretty good sized numbers in your life, but did you get a nosebleed doing this one?
Yeah. It was
did you wake up at 3 in the morning and say, I can't believe I'm talking numbers this big?
Bernie Ebbers and I were looking at this and saying, we're going to have 70,000 employees. We always thought of ourselves, Bernie started as, he had a startup 10 years ago, and he bought a whole bunch of little companies, and all of a sudden became bigger and bigger and did an unbelievably fantastic job. And we did the same thing. And never thought of ourselves as a big company. Now we, 75,000 people, and you start
2 years after you knew the name of every one of your employees.
Yeah, it's sad. We had a UUNET all-employee meeting out in Virginia a few weeks ago, and we had to hold it in the warehouse, and we used to hold it in, in the conference room. And and just in the Virginia building, we had something like 6,800 people at this all-employee meeting. It's just ridiculous. It defies the imagination.
Do you still concern yourself with that process of assimilating all these people as they come in?
We worry about that. Managing diverse cultures is a very tough thing.
You used to have these company-wide meetings where people be cheering and yelling.
They still are. They're like.
There's a quote here, somebody yelling, "John, I want you to have my baby. I want to have your baby," or whatever it was.
Well, we've made a lot of money. The people at UUNET have made a lot of money on stock options, and they tend to think of the management team as heroes. And I've had probably a lot of notoriety that's probably not warranted.
Can you keep all those rich people?
We've kept most of them. It's.
Okay, so what about you? For years and years you did this day-to-day, building the company, working the numbers, doing the deals, and now you're in this sort of senior emeritus role. I mean, is that sufficiently
Well,
rewarding to you? I mean, you're still a young man.
Yeah, I don't know if emeritus is the right one. When we do deals, I mean, I'm right in the middle of it, sort of leading the charge to get the deal done, in it every day.
Yeah, but do you do this 5 years from now? Do you do this 10 years from now?
I don't, 10 years from now, possibly not. I don't know how long it'll still stay fun, but, right now it's
So you
still
go angel yourself.
fun.
You got enough money. You go out and start your own little outfit and work out of the back of the store again.
I have a number of those sort of new companies, startup companies that I'm either the primary investor in or a primary investor in, and I'm helping them out. I'm on the board. I help them do things. And so I have my hand in a lot of those new efforts. So it's sufficiently so that it keeps me interested and excited. A couple of my partners from UUNET have started businesses, and I'm in there trying to help them out. So I've got kind of other things that I'm doing, sort of as very time-consuming hobbies, I guess is the way you look at it.
So much of your advantage has always been your energy. At some point, energy flags a little bit. I mean, time does take its toll.
They say that, otherwise you just die. I mean,
Yeah, well, yeah,
I mean, that's
there's the two alternatives.
You get a heart attack or...
What happens when you start to slow down?
I think I've been able to move and change in my life. I've made a number of changes in job types and careers. I've had big jobs, moved to small jobs. I've taken on large jobs after that. So I feel like I'll be able to make the changes required. And when it's no longer fun, I'll stop doing it and do something else.
Go back to history. Accounting.
Accounting is very unlikely. My dad would be the most surprised.
Is he surprised at how well you've done, or he always know you're going to do it?
Oh, nobody ever knew that. I mean,
Nobody knows you're going to be this far, but people have a sense that somebody's going to be a success in this life.
I think my father and mother always expected me, always thought I would be successful, but they never pushed me to be successful in any specific way. They wanted me to be the best at what I did, and if I was a historian, they would have loved it. If I was a teacher, they would have loved it. The UUNET story at MCI WorldCom and all this is like a storybook thing. I mean, they're just absolutely, completely, and totally astounded.
So when you go to these little startups you're helping out, and it's full of 22-year-old John Sidgemores running around. Probably no one quite like you. You're sort of one of a kind when it comes to energy. But I mean, smart, ambitious young men and women who really want to start their companies. What do you tell them? Has the world changed completely? I mean, you basically help create this new economy, this .com world, and they inhabit it. What do you tell them? What advice do you give them?
I think, first of all, if you really believe so strongly in something that you have to do it hard, and work at it as hard as you possibly can. And I give everybody the same advice: worry about it every single day, because even the best businesses can go under. IBM proved that in the 80s. AT&T proved that in the early 90s. Nobody is immune. I mean, life is moving so fast in the business world today,
So
especially in technology.
you're always an entrepreneur.
You're always worrying. You're always worrying. You're moving and changing your strategy, checking things out. And any small company has to realize that you need the super young, entrepreneurial, brilliant technical guys and sales guys, and you also need a few slightly older guys that can help provide some adult supervision.
Guys a little bit gray in their beard?
Processes. It was funny, when I went to UUNET, I was the second oldest one there. I think I was 39 or 40, or I was some ridiculously young number. Second oldest one there. And the guy who was the oldest was 46, and they called him Pops. The guy's 46 years old. The average age then was like 22 or something. I think the average age is 25 now.
And now in your mid-40s, you're the grand old man.
Oh yeah. But you need a balance. You really do need a balance. The passion and the energy of of the young entrepreneurs is fantastic. And one or two slightly older guys that remember how things didn't work or did work.
So they need to be directed. They got the energy. They need.
Yeah. When I went to UUNET, I remember thinking there was a lot of infighting. I mean, sort of like little emotional spats between engineers. I mean, just for no reason at all. And part of the reason was they'd go to these meetings, and they didn't know how to have meetings. They had never been to a company where there was a meeting. So they'd go to a meeting, and it was completely, chaotic. And they'd have arguments and so forth. And a couple of the sort of older guys that had been in larger corporations for a couple of years, sort of
2 years of corporate experience.
Yeah, that was a lot. I mean, that lent some maturity to the situation.
Well, the new rules now seem to suggest that having experience is anathema to success, that you don't need adult supervision.
I think you need a balance. You don't want so much adult supervision that people remember how it worked and have a whole, set of rules in their mind about how businesses
decide in advance it can't be done because it didn't work 12 years ago.
There's no equation to making business work that you can plug in. I mean, every situation's different, every era is different, every industry is different, and you have to move and change with the times. On the other hand, you have to remember, historical events so that at least you watch out for certain things.